Heroes in Crisis has just hit the halfway point, and is this one of the best issues we've gotten so far? Let's find out. What's up, everybody? I'm Stan, and welcome to Detail Comics, where we go over comics in detail. This is an iRate review, the show where I go over a comic book, its story, its art, give you my impressions, and let you know whether it's something you need to go back to the comic book shop for or not. Make sure you subscribe to get more of these every single week. The book that I want to talk about right now is Heroes in Crisis number 5 from the team of Tom King and Clay Mann. And overall, it's been getting a lot of attention, especially after the success of Tom King's Mr. Miracle series, his Vision series, and his ongoing run in Batman, though some people may or may not agree with that statement. What I really want to look for here is what kind of clues and vibe we're getting from the characters and how things are proceeding, but I was blindsided by one of the best Superman speeches I've read in a long time. But let's dive in and see what I'm talking about. It's tough to dive into this one because it's my first video on Heroes in Crisis, and issue number 5 is not the place to start. Overall, opening up with Booster Gold admitting what happened inside the Batman series before the wedding, where all he can now see on his visor is blood, seeing him next to Ted Kord's Blue Beetle, and coming up with this idea to go hit Barry Allen and take all his stuff and figure out the mystery that Batman and the Flash can't solve. It's a really interesting take, but there's so much in front of it that really needs to be taken into consideration when it comes to the rest of this storyline. We've seen Commander Steel dead, but now we get his inner monologue, his feelings, the trauma that is unfolded inside his brain. He was stored dead inside the headquarters of the Justice League of America and brought back to life multiple times. He was used as a weapon by a fellow hero. It's one of those interesting things where Tom King takes these events that we only read about in a fantastical comic book and grounds them in the psyche of somebody that's experienced this trauma, which is a really odd and interesting take, and probably what makes Heroes in Crisis one of my most anticipated books every time that it comes out. Of course, we have a little bit more traditional fare with Batman and Batgirl having a little bit of banter. He'd already checked over Skeets, but Batgirl just wants to make sure, and as we see her evacuate the cave, we go back to Superman and Lois Lane. Superman has to do something. The news of Sanctuary has spilled out into the overworld, and they can no longer hide these things, and Batman is not going to be doing this kind of press. Superman and Wonder Woman, they are the face, they are the voice of this unified trinity of heroes that essentially, I wouldn't necessarily say rule, but act as representatives for the hero community at large. And Clark, being a reporter, wants to make sure that his point is clear, his words are precise, and say everything that he needs to. Again, we get more struggles as we see Solstice try to transform into a non-light energy kind of being, and unfortunately failing. We see the interrogation of Skeets by Batgirl, but it's not necessarily Batgirl hammering out most of the details, if you get what I mean. Booster Gold, of course, invades the Flash's sanctuary, his lab, where he's trying to do everything, and you know what? His plan with Ted works. And it's just through the validation of Batman that makes me think that Ted isn't a hallucination. I mean, that was the most obvious thing, but with his recollections at Sanctuary and with his conversations, the fact that they're sitting there together, I mean, I guess he's not a hallucination. It's one of those things that, well, I wouldn't have been surprised at. However, the real heart of this issue, the heart of the issue for me, is when Superman starts delivering his speech. The speech about the men and women that have dedicated their lives to protecting and serving life and taking care of those around them without any sense of reward, and they do it defiantly. They stand up in front of people at the front lines knowing that this is the potential demise. And this is kind of set against the investigation of Blue Beetle and Booster Gold, looking into the evidence that was in Barry Allen's lab. And Booster seems to remember something regarding how they track time travelers. They measure the RNA, the half-life of the DNA of an individual versus their birthday, and he uses that to kind of further their investigation. Superman continues on talking about the struggle of mental health, how people, do they feel unsafe, do they feel unworthy of the trust that the public has been given them, and should the public be afraid? No, they shouldn't. He, as an alien, he has come to earn the friendship. He's been given the label of hero, and he works hard to earn that every single day. And this speech is quite possibly one of the best pieces of Superman writing that I've read in recent memory. Outside of my real fan favorites in the Tomasi run, this is one, it sounds like to be some sort of, pure hero when it comes to Superman, and it's an understanding of the character and what he's gone through and how it's kind of related in a more grounded sense without necessarily making it feel like he's too human in this nature. He is some outsider looking for our validation, and we are providing that in the role of a hero, and he works hard to make sure that he deserves that. It's like he feels unworthy in some cases of this kind of adoration. And I find that a really interesting take on the Superman character. Of course, we have the background of Batgirl and Harley Quinn rushing to try and find Booster Gold in his hideout, but we also get it set against another backdrop of Shining Knight fighting off a dragon and various other heroes that have earned their place inside the DC universe as heroes themselves, and what they do to stand against the threats to humanity. When the heroes say, "This is my home, it is in my care, and though you seek its destruction, I am here, and today by God, it will not fall." It's one of those things where Tom King's writing really jumps off the page at me. That's why I kind of repeated it verbatim, because it speaks to the defense of a country, a defense of a family. It's something that you could relate to when you need that moment of willpower to stand up against forces that seem insurmountable, odds that cannot be overcome. You have to find that will, that dedication, despite your fear and despite your hardships, to move forward, and that's just a great message to really send. Despite the fact that Superman and Wonder Woman themselves experience these nightmares and they will endure them forever. However, the biggest clue comes after that speech, as it kind of concludes. We see a red-handed glove picking up the rose that Harley Quinn cast off a bridge in an earlier issue. It seems to relate to some sort of speedster that we may have seen in the past. Booster, with his conclusion, Wally West is 5 days too old to be the actual Wally West that was murdered on that day at Sanctuary. Harley and Batgirl have found him, and that is going to be the end. But we conclude on a very simple but poignant piece of conversation between Harley Quinn and the AI at Sanctuary when she talks about how Mr. J used to tease her, taunt her, verbally abuse her, and then hit her, physically abusing her as well. And that's the real... it's the tough part of Heroes in Crisis, and it's what I can see dividing a number of different people. A lot of these situations hit very close to home as far as real constructs inside American world-based society. Anybody can experience domestic abuse. Anybody can be in an abusive relationship. A number of military personnel go out into the world to try and fight for truth, justice, the American way, and a variety of other different things, only to come back changed in a way that can't necessarily be described. This is a confession, but it's also a commentary. It's a really interesting storyline that we really need to see all the way through to the end. And with Wally returning from essentially the unknown, the grave, to come back and find his universe changed, his wife, his life, his children gone, no longer existing, the traumatic experience of that, and then trying to fight through it every step of the way, encountering other individuals that immediately remember him after touching, but it's just not quite enough. And I feel like there's a lot that's going to be happening before the end of this, even though it's the midway point. It's just getting started. But I want to know what you guys think, so hit me up in the comments down below and we can start the conversation about Heroes in Crisis number 5. Is it exactly what you've been hoping for, or has it kind of gone off the rails? But as always, if you like what you see, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to get more news, reviews, and commentary on comic books, comic book movies, comic book TV shows and games, and anything and everything inside the world of comics.